How's it going, everybody? This is Connor Lavelle, also known as Slight, on the Pokemon TCG Cube Discord server, and I am here with one of hopefully many deck analyses on successful Cube decks. And today I have Zak Krekeler's winning Gyarados deck from the May season of Pokemon Cube League. This deck I have chosen for a lot of reasons. One, it is impeccably built. There are a ton of fantastic cards that go into this deck that you might not play in every single deck that really contribute to different aspects of its strategy. Another is that Zak has included some tech cards that really shake up what is otherwise a really pretty linear strategy. And another is just that it's just a really focused deck. Really clean strategy, clear idea of what it wants to do. It doesn't have quite as many options, but it's not necessarily linear. As I've said, there are some cards in it that allow Zak to swing or influence certain bad matchups that he might run into without them. So, super excited to get into this one. I will start with just the general strategy of the deck. You want to use Tail Revenge Gyarados as quickly as possible, and to hit as hard as possible, you're aiming for 90 to 120 damage in the first couple of turns. Tail Revenge, of course, is a free attack, 30 damage for each Magikarp in your discard pile. Zak has the full kit of 6 of them, which means high damage is going to be very attainable. Zak also has a ton of different cards in the deck that allow him to get the Magikarps in the discard, so it's not going to be a terribly difficult task. But with that, let's go into more specifics. So I'm not going to talk too much about the Tail Revenge Gyarados. It's pretty much in here for Tail Revenge. It can, of course, use Wreak Havoc and Dragon Beat, but neither of those attacks are really amazing. These two Gyaradoses are interesting. They are mostly in the deck, at least from my understanding, to use in situations where you either don't have access to a Tail Revenge Gyarados, you have maybe a slower start, you're not able to find your discarding cards, or your opponent has disrupted your discard somehow, say for example with Lysander's Trump card, maybe Lysander Prism Star, things that will prevent you from dealing good damage with Tail Revenge. So that's when these cards come in. Dragon DNA Gyarados is going to deal more damage and use the attacks of the Magikarp underneath it. Usually it's going to be swinging one for 40 or 50. With Flail, you can swing one for like 120, 130, but that's a pretty best case, and most of the time you're not going to get that. But it's just a cheap, fairly powerful attacker that you can use if your Tail Revenge is not really up to snuff yet. And then this Gyarados from Ancient Origins, there is no real way to power up full Retaliation in this deck, other than Unknown V, which I'll get to a little bit later, but that's a little bit slow. The real reason why it's in the deck is for Thrash, and while it may not seem like an amazing attack, 4 energy for a possible 130 damage, guaranteed 100 damage, is very strong, especially with Scramble Energy, which is also in this deck, going to allow Zak to come back in the late game, maybe if he's out of Tail Revenge Gyaradoses, or it's going to allow him to deal really heavy damage while he has very few Magikarps in the discard. Moving on to his tech lines, we have a 1/1 Palkia Level X. Palkia Level X is an extremely powerful card in Cube. It gives you a double gust every single turn, so your opponent catches up one of your Pokemon, you catch up one of theirs. Most of the time, though, the person who uses it is not going to use it if it's going to put them in a position that they can't get out of. They're pretty much only going to use it favorably for themselves, so this is essentially a Lysander effect whenever Zak wants it. He does have several ways to get the whatever is put into the active out of the active, those being one of his pickup cards, which he has very many of, and he has a Hole in Energy WP. With a Psychic attached, the Pokemon will have free retreat, so plenty of ways to get that out of the active. And Zak's deck is not demanding on board space, so what he can do is he can just limit his board to Gyaradoses and Palkia, and then the opponent doesn't really have a great target. Moving on, we have a 1/1 Flareon line. This is to swing any metal or grass matchups Zak runs into. Metal, not quite a concern for Gyarados, but a lot of the time grass Pokemon can have a lot of HP and high resistance, or resistance to water. So what this does is it turns a matchup that might be a little bit more even than a traditional Stage 2 deck, or really just any normal deck, and it makes it more or less an auto win. And I do know that Zak played against a grass deck in the finals of the event, and he did win. I have to imagine Flare Effect Flareon was very useful there. But on the other side, he has a lot of cards that discard cards from his hand, so it is not going to be difficult for him to get rid of it in a matchup where it's not useful. So it's going to be a dead draw once, but he's not going to keep putting it back into the deck, and it's going to help fuel some of the other cards that he's got. So on to the tech one of basic Pokemon. The most important one in his deck by far is going to be Regice from Legends Awakened. It has a Power Regi move. It allows Zach to discard 2 Pokemon from the hand, and then if the opponent has a basic Pokemon, they have to switch it, a basic Pokemon active. Or if it's an evolution Pokemon, it just does nothing, but you do still get the discard due to a ruling that was made back when this card was originally printed. So this is going to be a searchable way for Zach to repeatedly discard Magikarps, which is the facilitator that Gyarados used when it was legal and standard, and it's probably the best facilitator there is in the game, shy of Battle Compressor, though Battle Compressor is not even searchable. The other one that I want to draw specific attention to is Mesprit with Psychic Bind. Zach has speed and he has damage just built into his deck. He's very consistent, he's very focused, his attacker has a lot of damage potential. Adding a layer of disruption to that makes it much harder for his opponent to respond to knockouts. And Mesprit does a phenomenal job of that. It's searchable, it's really easy to use. All you have to do is have one open bench spot. It's not an evolution Pokemon. And if Zach needs, he can even pick it up with Bryony's AZ, Acerola, things like that, and use it again. So this card just allows Zach to press any advantage that he manages to generate really, really hard. Going over some of the other one-of Pokemon he has in here. Dialga with Reverse Time, just a great recovery card. Bench it, put 3 Pokemon or energy from your discard on top of your deck. Gyarados decks are really demanding on recovery because you're going to be throwing away your basics a lot, and this is just a great part of that package. Sableye with Excavate. Excavate is a great power. It allows you to filter your draws. It can discard Magikarps. Most of the time, you're not going to see Magikarps with Excavate, but with Mallow in the deck, you certainly can stack it that way. And in general, it's just going to get rid of cards that you don't want to see and leave cards that you do want to see on top. And it can also allow you to plan out your next turn a little bit better. So Excavate, Sableye, pretty much play it in any deck that you draft, unless you're really, really tight on space. Girafarig, I think this is one of the weaker cards in the deck, but it does have some use. Foresight can set yourself up for a strong following turn by looking at the top 5 cards of your deck. You can disrupt your opponent by looking at the top 5 cards of their deck and putting useless cards on top. And then if his opponent has an active basic Pokemon with a really powerful Pokepower, then Girafarig can shut that off. So in this cube, I don't remember any specific examples, but it's generally a useful effect. One of the most powerful basic techs in any cube is going to be Mimikyu. It's great to start with because it has 1 for draw 2. You're never going to be sad to do that in cube, especially on the first couple of turns. And then Copycat is the real reason why you want Mimikyu in your deck. For 2 energy, it's going to allow you to copy any of your opponent's most recently used attacks for free. So if Zach loses a Gyarados to a very powerful attacker, then a lot of the time Mimikyu is just going to be able to come up and take a revenge knockout and not endanger any of Zach's more valuable Gyarados lines. So a lot of cube comes down to a resource battle. Your resources versus your opponent's resources, who can use them more efficiently, who can get access to them more quickly, that kind of thing. Mimikyu is a lot less valuable of a resource than a Gyarados line, so to be able to take a knockout with that so quickly and so effortlessly is going to be a huge help in a lot of games. Pichu, pretty standard setup Pokemon. Playground is going to allow you to fill your bench for no energy. It is going to sometimes resist any damage on the following turn as well. Zach's deck isn't super demanding on bench space, however, it can be really useful just to develop out, say, a Mimikyu, a couple of Magikarps, Palkia, and Regice, and then you're pretty much set for the game. And then lastly, one of my favorite cards in this entire deck is Unknown V. It is not a card that I think I ever would have thought to include myself, but it has a ton of great uses in this deck. The Pokepower Vacation is kind of a niche use, but it can be really, really useful when you need it. You can end your turn to remove 2 damage counters from each of your Pokemon. And what that does is it gives Zach great insurance against spread strategies. If he takes a little bit of damage early on and he's not really able to respond by attacking or pressuring his opponent, then it's a great way to end the turn. And Hidden Power, 1 Psychic for 30 is actually pretty decent in Cube. I know Zach got a donk with it at least once, and what it is if he is not able to take a 1-hit knockout with one of his attackers, then Unknown V can be a low-value Pokemon that can clean up that knockout and force his opponent to put up something more valuable to trade with it. In addition, Hidden Powers dealing 10 damage to the bench is a drawback in most cases, but it does turn on Acerola for any of Zak's Pokemon, which can be really useful for something like recycling Mesprit. Zak's energy line, nothing super crazy going on. He is clearly not really intending to attack with his Gyaradoses very often. Only 4 water energy, 1 multi-energy, 1 scramble energy, but he wants to keep the option open, and he's got more basic water than anything else. The 2 biggest energy in here, I would say, are the Whole Energy WP, which is just going to make it so that his Palkia level X is much more effective with that free retreat, and the Rescue Energy, which is going to give him back a Gyarados when it's knocked out. In a deck like Gyarados, you don't really feel the downside of not getting all the cards that are attached to Gyarados back because it attacks for free. So really the only thing you've lost is a Rescue Energy, and you're pretty happy to trade a Rescue Energy for a full Gyarados line. And then Scramble Energy is great if he's behind. Doesn't happen that often, but in the event that he is, it can be really strong with an attack like Thrash. Just being able to pull 100 or 130 damage out of nowhere is really good. Down onto his supporter line, Zak has an absolutely ridiculous supporter line in this deck. His card quality is super, super high. He's got cards like Marnie, Professor Sycamore, Professor Juniper, and Steven's Advice all in the same deck, which is, it's a lot. One other thing that I'd like to draw attention to is that he has a ton of ways to discard cards with his supporters in this deck as well. He can Mallow a Magikarp on top, discard that with Sableye. He can use Hole in Scientist to discard Hole in Adventurer, Sage's Training, Sophocles. There are just so many ways. And this is one of the things that is easy to overlook when you're analyzing a deck. Little advantages like this, little synergies that don't necessarily jump out, but go such a long way in just making your deck cohesive and fast. So this might speed out Zak by a turn. So let's say he plays a Sophocles instead of like a Howl, and he discards 2 Magikarps from his hand and then is able to draw into more cards. That extra turn of attacking is going to be potentially really valuable, and if he ends up in any kind of close prize trade with his opponent, that's going to be a huge advantage by the end of the game. Zak has 5 utility supporters in this deck, not a ton, but the ones that he does have are very good. Flower Shop Lady, pretty traditional recovery. Probably one of the weaker recovery cards that he has in the deck because he doesn't really want to get back a lot of energy, but it's probably the only one that he saw, or at least the only one he had access to at the end of the draft, and it's perfectly serviceable. He has 3, which I believe is the full suite of pickup cards in this cube, and pickup cards in a Gyarados deck are just absurd. Gyarados is a stage 1, 130 HP. That is absolutely massive. And couple with that, the fact that most of his Gyaradoses attack for no energy, and a lot of the time this is just going to be free prize denial, but it can also be used to get cards out of the active if they've been stranded with restructure. It's also a way to recycle things like Mesprit to repeated use of Psychic Bind. And then he has the most powerful card in the Pokemon TCG, Guzma. I could go on and on about why Guzma is so broken. I think pretty much anybody who is currently playing the game has experienced why this card is so powerful, but it essentially is the most powerful disruptive card in the entire Pokemon TCG, allowing you to switch your active and pull up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon at the same time. Really, really powerful effect. It makes it so that his opponent's bench is not safe. They can't just set up on him in most cases, and if they try, he's going to be able to target down the most valuable thing on their board and knock it out, which means that his offensive pressure is going to be maintained really, really well. Onto the stadiums. Narrow Gym, not a super strong card. Not a super strong card in this deck either. But this cube does have a lot of really strong stadiums, and I believe that Zak used it more as a counter stadium than anything, and in that way, it doesn't really hurt him at all, and it could hurt his opponent. So it's a great counter stadium. You really want a lot of ways to get rid of stadiums in this cube. It has things like Thunder Mountain, Heat Factory. You just want to eliminate those advantages for your opponent because they can be really significant. And Narrow Gym is a totally fine counter stadium. I really like the usage of 2 stadiums in this deck just to make sure you have some way to respond. Silent Lab is the other stadium. Zak does have quite a few basics with powers. However, most of the time he's going to use them once or twice and then be done with them. The exception being Excavate Sableye. That's not a big deal though. But it can be very harmful to his opponent. For example, if Zak disrupts them, if he shuffles their hand back, if they're just playing a deck that relies a lot on basic powers or bodies, then Silent Lab is going to be a potentially brutal card in that matchup. So, big fan of it in this deck, and it definitely pulls its weight, I would imagine. Moving on to the trainers. Zach has a really powerful suite of consistency trainers in his deck. A couple of disruptive ones, but it's definitely clear that what he's trying to get out of this trainer line is just setting up every game, finding his Pokemon, drawing his cards, and he does that really well. Again, super high card quality. Erica, Pokemon Communication, Computer Search, Level Ball, versus Seeker. These are some of the best consistency trainers you can get in any cube. He really tries to push for speed here with the Roller Skates, Bill's Teleporter. Pokeradar, not an amazing card, but it's serviceable. And he's got plenty of Pokemon in the deck, so most of the time he'll find at least something. But these cards really just aimed at getting as fast of a start as possible and finding you your first Tail Revenge for 60 or more damage. And then the last two cards in the deck are the utility items Reset Stamp and Pokemon Reversal. And these cards are very powerful, of course. Pokemon Reversal, another catcher effect. Catcher effects are, as we've already discussed in the video, a great asset to add to any deck, and he is totally okay with the coin flip on this. One, because he has lots of other ways to bring up one of his opponent's bench Pokemon, but also because he's a fast deck and he draws a lot of cards, so this ultimately being a card that doesn't do anything is not that bad for him. In addition, he has a Reset Stamp. Reset Stamp is, of course, one of the most powerful hand disruption cards in the entire Pokemon TCG, and it is no different here. It really allows him to cement an advantage if Zach is ahead, or if he's behind by like one prize, but he's got a Gyarados active. It is very easy for him to Reset Stamp his opponent's hand down and then play something like a Silent Lab or a Mesprit. And then suddenly his opponent has very few cards, they can't use any powers, and they have to somehow respond to a 130 HP Pokemon attacking them. And that is just a tremendously difficult combo to work around, and add to that he can even use an effect like Restructure or Guzma or Pokemon Reversal in that same turn. It really just locks up the game. Whenever he can whenever he can take advantage of these effects, it pushes the game heavily in his favor. So that is Zak Krekeler's winning list from the May Cube League. Overall, impeccably built deck, impeccably drafted deck. There are so few cards that I would even want in a deck like this that aren't already here. So it's not a big surprise that he won. If you are looking to emulate something similar to this, or if you're looking for takeaways, then the biggest thing that you can draw from this is a focused strategy is not necessarily linear, and there are ways to make a linear strategy into a slightly more diverse one that's going to have a lot better matchups. All of Zach's utility stuff in here really pushes his deck from strong and good into ridiculous in a lot of cases, being able to deny prizes and lock the opponent and pull up their bench, and you have a really strong attacker. All of those things come together to what for a lot of people felt like an unstoppable deck to beat. And it definitely felt like that when I played against him in top 4 as well. The other takeaway is to try and pick up on little advantages. Things like your Sophocles, your Hole and Adventurer, things that help your strategy in smaller ways can be a huge impact when you're actually in the game. You don't need every single card in your deck to be a Professor Sycamore to get to work with your strategy and to end up in your trainer line too. Lower value trainers can be really important in Cube just because there aren't enough high value trainers for everybody to have a ton of them. Even in a deck like this, you see some weaker cards, things like Underground Expedition, Mallow, not amazing, Flower Shop Lady, Pokeradar. These are cards that you would not play if you had a better option, but Zach understood in the draft that he would need a certain number of consistency cards, and even a poor consistency card is better than no consistency card in a lot of cases. So if you are looking to kind of level up from a new Cube player, an inexperienced Cube player, into a strong Cube player who can build successful decks, I would really strongly advise trying out something like this deck. A very focused strategy. Zach doesn't have a ton going on in here. You don't always need a ton going on in your deck for it to be really good. You just need to know exactly how the pieces are going to interact and what you can do to push the advantages that you do have. So those are the biggest takeaways that I think this deck brings, and I think they're some of the most important takeaways when you're learning Cube. And with that, that is all I've got for you guys today. Hopefully I will have a new deck analysis out soon, and I will definitely be posting my draft for Saturday's Cube League shortly as well. So look forward to that. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you have a fantastic day.